Bonjour. Bonjour.
Boom. Is the microphone working? Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? It is a great pleasure to be back again in Caen this year. Thank you to the organizers for these days of meeting and of debate that are absolutely fascinating. In Caen, you can really hear the world speaking. We talk about war. We're also looking for sources of hope and for peace. I would like to greet all the youngsters that are here today, all the teenagers, high schoolers. Raise your hand if you are AGGSP for, okay, that's why you're here. Raise your hand if you're listening to the English, just in case. Okay, we have 2, 3, okay. And we know that AGGSP, it's political science, and we're very happy to meet you in such big numbers today. Yeah, so we know 90% of the people in the audience, they're just here to get grades. In Caen, we listen to the world. We listen to the world tell us about war and also about peace. As we said this morning, we were probably here at the plenary debate this morning. We spoke a lot about a world in crisis, a world that is really suffering, but also by trying reasons to understand and to hope. I often say that contemplating already an issue, it's also a way for you to be less afraid. When you understand something, you're less afraid of it. You, teenagers who study geopolitics in high school, I would like to congratulate you to have this curiosity for the wider world. It also means that in a certain way you refuse to kind of lock yourself in and looking only inwards, you're looking outwards. And you know what we want with people in the geography? You said you're never just as intelligent as when you change the scope. You are a generation who really wants to change the scope, to widen the scope, because you have lived the terrorism in the years in 2015, then the pandemic of COVID, because you live, of course, the return of war in Europe and Ukraine, of course, because there is your commitment for climate, and you know how important for you and more than any other generation how important your commitment for climate. You know, you can't just look inside your borders. You need to think more multilateralism. You are hungry for world governance, and that meets your curiosity for the wider world. Today we're going to take a trip around a region of Europe that is kind of sometimes invisible. Let's call it the Eastern Europe. It's or Eastern Europe, Oriental Europe. This is a Europe we need to discover, because it's when you go in the countries of my guests here that there is a dynamics, a modernity, I would say a democratic conviction that we, the older democracy, have kind of lost. A will, absolutely strong will to defend the values of democracy and liberty and freedom and avoid war. We're going to speak about a Polish journalist and a Romanian journalist, and Your Excellency, the ambassador of Lithuania in France. The three countries are on the doorsteps of war, how they live in their daily life, this daily threat of Russian aggression, how it's changed geopolitically, politically, economically. We need to listen to their voices, and I hope that we're also going to ask you to discover their countries. If you can, when you can, go to Poland, go to the Baltics, go and discover Bucharest. It's an incredible city. Bucharest is a small Paris. It's a European capital as the other. Romania, it's not the Ceausescu anymore. It's not the caricature of a grey and eastern town. Go and discover Warsaw, Krakow, Budynia, like I've done it a couple of months ago, to really discover this new European dynamics that we kind of lost in the old Europe, and also discover the Baltics, and particularly Vilnius. You're going to speak about your country that is welcoming a certain number of resistance to the Putin regime, intellectuals, journalists, Mr. Volkov, who is a close relative of Alexei Navalny. So to better understand the Eastern European, let's start with a short documentary that we done a couple of months ago. Some data will sadly be outdated, but most of this is this documentary is still relevant, I hope, is it? It's called Europe, a Trend Towards the East. And then we'll come back with my three guests.
Ravi de vous retrouver pour ce nouveau numéro du Dessous des cartes. Aujourd'hui, je vous emmène à l'un des postes frontières entre la Pologne et l'Ukraine. Regardez, nous sommes en novembre 2023. Il s'agit d'un blocage organisé par les routiers polonais pour gêner les routiers ukrainiens. Pourquoi ? Parce que depuis l'invasion russe de l'Ukraine, les routiers ukrainiens sont autorisés par Bruxelles à rentrer dans l'Union sans permis particulier, concurrence jugée déloyale par les routiers polonais. C'est une crainte qu'ont certains Européens. L'Ukraine pèserait lourd si elle rejoignait l'Union européenne. Alors au-delà, on a voulu poser la question suivante. La guerre en Ukraine donne-t-elle un nouveau rôle aux pays de l'Est ? État balte à l'avant-garde du sevrage vis-à-vis des hydrocarbures russes ? Nouveau rôle stratégique de la Pologne, notamment d'un point de vue militaire ? Pays des Balkans, candidat à l'Union, l'Europe va-t-elle pencher toujours plus à l'Est ? La réponse avec nos cartes. 1989, la communauté économique européenne, 341 millions d'habitants, est un club de 12 démocraties prospères. Sa capitale, Bruxelles, abrite aussi l'OTAN, alliance militaire défensive de 14 membres, créée en 1949 par les États-Unis, face à l'occupation soviétique de l'autre Europe, celle de l'Est. Pologne, RDA, Tchécoslovaquie, Hongrie, Roumanie et Bulgarie. La chute du mur de Berlin, puis la fin du pacte de Varsovie, ouvre un nouvel horizon à 133 millions d'habitants, si l'on inclut dans cet Est européen les États baltes et les Balkans. L'ex-RDA intègre la CEE et l'OTAN dès la réunification allemande le 3 octobre 1990. En parallèle, la constitution par Moscou d'une nouvelle alliance, la communauté des États indépendants et le déclenchement de la première guerre de Tchétchénie inquiètent les anciens satellites. Résultat, en 1999, Varsovie, Prague et Budapest rejoignent à leur tour l'OTAN, celle-ci s'étant engagée à ne pas stationner d'armes nucléaires dans l'ex-bloc de l'Est. L'Alliance fête alors ses 50 ans, vient de pacifier la Bosnie-Herzégovine, intervient militairement lors de la guerre du Kosovo, ce qui irrite grandement Moscou. Entre 2004 et 2020, 11 autres États de l'ex-empire soviétique vont s'ancrer à l'ouest, sous le parapluie de l'OTAN. États baltes, Roumanie, Bulgarie, Slovaquie et Slovénie, plus 4 États des Balkans, Croatie, Albanie, Monténégro et enfin Macédoine du Nord. En parallèle, Bruxelles a fixé dès 1993 des règles aux pays de l'Est qui veulent intégrer l'Union européenne, les critères dits de Copenhague. Démocratie, respect des minorités, économie de marché viable, intégration du droit européen. Entre 2004 et 2007, l'UE s'ouvre ainsi à ses 10 États, plus Malte et Chypre, aidant à y améliorer infrastructures et niveau de vie. Mais le degré d'intégration européenne varie selon le pays. Parmi ceux qui sont entrés dans l'UE avant 2008, les États baltes, la Slovaquie et la Slovénie sont désormais membres complets des espaces Schengen et Euro, mais la Pologne, la République tchèque et la Hongrie, soit 59 millions d'habitants, restent hors de l'euro, faute de convergence suffisante. L'adhésion simple de Bucarest et de Sofia, hors euro et hors Schengen, a été repoussée de 3 ans pour cause de corruption et de manque de contrôle des frontières. Mais surtout, d'autres divergences plus fondamentales apparaissent au grand jour. Dès 2010, l'autoritaire Viktor Orban transforme la Hongrie en démocratie illibérale, réduisant les droits de l'opposition et de la presse et jouant la carte nationaliste, y compris vers les minorités hongroises des États voisins. La Hongrie est suivie en 2015 par la Pologne, 5e État le plus peuplé de l'Union, où les ultra-conservateurs du parti Droit et Justice attaquent juges, droit à l'avortement et homosexuels. Lors de la crise migratoire de 2015, ces pays dits du groupe de Visegrad refusent une répartition équitable des demandeurs d'asile en Europe. Enfin, en 2018, en Slovaquie, un journaliste dénonçant la corruption du pouvoir est assassiné. Ces atteintes aux valeurs fondamentales de l'Union européenne choquent l'Ouest. créant une méfiance quant à la possibilité de nouveaux élargissements. Promis dès 2003 aux pays des Balkans, ils n'aboutiront que pour la Croatie en 2013. La Russie de Vladimir Poutine, elle, bloque les rapprochements de la Géorgie et de l'Ukraine avec l'Union européenne et l'OTAN, en occupant en 2008 en Géorgie l'Ossétie du Sud et l'Abkhazie, et en Ukraine le Donbass et la Crimée en 2014. Les sanctions européennes, puis les accords russo-ukrainiens de Minsk, parrainés par Paris et Berlin, figent le conflit sans le résoudre. Varsovie et les États baltes ont beau alerter face à l'expansionnisme russe, les 28 sont occupés par les crises de l'euro en Grèce, par le Brexit et par la crise mondiale du Covid-19. On l'aura compris, la chute du mur a permis de casser la séparation Est-Ouest de l'Europe, entraînant une adhésion de nombreux pays de l'ex-bloc soviétique à l'Union européenne et à l'OTAN. Sauf qu'au fil du temps, on l'a vu, de nouveaux clivages Est-Ouest ont réapparu, tandis que le nouvel impérialisme russe a remis toute la lumière sur cet Est européen, lui donnant, on va le voir, un nouveau rôle géostratégique. En effet, la guerre en Ukraine place les pays de l'Est en première ligne, tant pour l'accueil des 8 millions de réfugiés ukrainiens, dont on voit ici le nombre à l'automne 2023, que pour l'aide directe, jusqu'à 1% de leur PIB pour les États baltes et la Pologne, contre 0,2% pour l'Europe de l'Ouest. Côté militaire, l'aide américaine, britannique, allemande domine en valeur absolue, mais les dons de missiles baltes, d'avions tchèques et de chars polonais ont été cruciaux. Et en 2022, le boom des dépenses militaires a atteint 36% en Finlande, 27% en Lituanie, 11% en Pologne, selon l'Institut CIPRI. En défendant son flanc Est, l'OTAN a par ailleurs envoyé 4 bataillons multinationaux en Slovaquie, Hongrie, Roumanie et Bulgarie, renforcer les 4 déjà stationnés depuis 2017 en Pologne et dans les États baltes. Au total, 40 000 hommes, en plus des 100 000 GIs en Europe. À cela s'ajoute l'adhésion en urgence à l'OTAN de la Finlande le 4 avril 2023, celle de la Suède attendant la ratification de Budapest qui la bloque. De quoi tripler la frontière commune OTAN-Russie. On voit ici les 1340 km de la frontière Finlande-Russie qu'Helsinki a commencé à fortifier sur certaines sections. L'OTAN contrôle aussi la Baltique, qui était jusqu'en 1989 un lac soviétique. En réaction, Moscou a déployé des missiles Iskander dans son enclave européenne de Kaliningrad, capable d'atteindre la Suède. En cas de guerre directe, l'OTAN déploierait jusqu'à 300 000 soldats le long de sa frontière Est. Ce nouveau poids géostratégique renforce également l'influence politique des pays de l'Est à Bruxelles. Depuis 2014, les États baltes alertaient l'Europe d'une trop grande dépendance énergétique vis-à-vis de la Russie. En 2022, Berlin suspend enfin les 2 gazoducs Nord Stream. Par ailleurs, l'UE va voter 11 paquets de sanctions contre la Russie et débloquer 75 milliards d'euros en 2022-2023 pour l'Ukraine et les pays limitrophes, autant que les États-Unis. Côté énergie, les États baltes montrent l'exemple en mettant fin à toute importation de gaz russe. Pologne et Roumanie jouent désormais également les premiers rôles en Europe. Pour contourner le blocus russe en mer Noire, des couloirs sont établis via ces 2 pays, permettant d'exporter 60% des céréales d'Ukraine. Sans oublier les 60 millions d'euros de dédommagement pour les agriculteurs polonais, roumains et bulgares. Surtout, lors des Conseils européens de 2022 et 2023, l'idée d'un élargissement aux Balkans, à l'Ukraine, la Moldavie et la Géorgie a fait son grand retour. L'Union européenne s'inquiète de l'influence de la Russie très active en Serbie, en République serbe de Bosnie-Herzégovine et au Monténégro, mais aussi d'autres influences étrangères concurrentes. Celle de la Turquie autoritaire d'Erdogan en Bosnie et de la Chine de Xi Jinping, Pékin ayant intégré tous les Balkans sauf le Kosovo à son initiative dite 14+1, y finançant ponts et autoroutes. Sauf que cet élargissement de l'UE n'a rien d'évident. Côté candidat, les 6 États des Balkans, 17,5 millions d'habitants, doivent progresser sur le plan de la démocratie et de la lutte contre la corruption. Par ailleurs, les escarmouches entre la Serbie pro-russe et le Kosovo restent fréquentes, 5 États de l'UE refusant toujours de reconnaître le Kosovo. Enfin, l'Ukraine, la Moldavie et la Géorgie ont toutes des troupes russes sur leur territoire. Et puis il y a un défi colossal pour cette future Union européenne élargie. Comment éviter la paralysie d'une Union à 36 ? À elle seule, l'intégration de l'Ukraine, 37 millions d'habitants souvent ruraux, absorberait 20% des fonds européens selon une étude de l'UE. Et à 36, impossible de conserver un vote à l'unanimité pour toutes les grandes décisions, ni même d'avoir des commissaires pour tous les États membres. Ces réformes institutionnelles de l'UE, indispensables, seront difficiles. Surtout, la guerre en Ukraine menace désormais de diviser cet Est européen. Si le nouveau gouvernement polonais de Donald Tusk, élu en octobre 2023, est favorable aux aides à Kiev, en Slovaquie, l'eurosceptique Fico veut les réduire, tout comme le hongrois Orbán, seul dirigeant européen à avoir rencontré Poutine en 2023. L'invasion russe de l'Ukraine et 2 années de guerre ont donc déplacé le centre de gravité de l'Europe vers l'est du continent, de même que les projets d'élargissement de l'Union européenne. Cette Europe à 35 ou 36, difficile à réaliser, on l'a vu, donnerait au continent un poids économique équivalent à celui des États-Unis. Mais sur le plan politique, cette communauté élargie partagerait-elle vraiment les mêmes valeurs, notamment en ce qui concerne le modèle européen de la démocratie libérale ? Et pour aller plus loin, l'Atlas de l'Europe par Franck Tétard et Pierre-Alexandre Mounier aux éditions Autrement. Ainsi s'achève ce nouveau numéro du Dessous des cartes. Rendez-vous bien sûr la semaine prochaine, même endroit, même heure. Et d'ici là, n'oubliez pas nos réseaux sociaux et arte.tv pour retrouver l'ensemble de nos vidéos. Abonnez-vous, commentez.
Thank you. How live in peace at the doors of with the war on your doorstep? We're going to welcome now our 3 guests. Thank you for them to join us this afternoon. For Arnoldas Frankovicius, I've already mispronounced your name, Vaskavicius. You have just been nominated ambassador of Lithuania in France. But of course, you've studied political science in France, which is why you speak perfect French. You have been diplomatic advisor of Mr. Martin Schulz, President of the European Parliament. You've been Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania between 2021 and February 2022. You'll tell us how you were in your functions when Vladimir Putin attacked Ukraine. We are very happy to better understand with you how you live in Lithuania with the war at your doorstep. I'm also happy to welcome today 2 fellow journalists, a fellow journalist from Public Romanian Television, Michaela Antoș. Thank you to be in Caen today. Thank you for this invitation, absolutely formidable. It's very impressive. I hope that we will have all the responses for you. Your curiosity, and I hope your questions, we will be able to answer all your questions. Thank you, Mihaela. And Anna Kowalska, thank you, all of you. You work for the public Polish television. Maybe tell those who haven't followed the recent actual news in Poland. There's many things in Poland happening on the media front since the defeat of the PIS party that had been exerted a strong control. It was even propaganda. Since Donald Tusk is come back, you have not become a state-led, but you've recovered a form of freedom and independence, which should be the case of any public media. Thank you to tell about your country, the strategic importance of what's going on in the European, East European. It's particularly true for Poland. We talk about the possible first army of Europe since the huge effort investment in the army. We've seen that the part of GDP dedicated to defense could be between 7%. We're very far away from the 2% of GDP that corresponds to what NATO has asked to the European countries. Does this mean that being Polish today, it's something to be living in constantly with the fear of Putin? Yes, absolutely. This fear of Putin in Poland we felt it for decades. I think we agree with Your Excellency that Poland and the Baltic States, they have been warning for a long time, European Union, that Russia is not our ally, it's our enemy. We had heads of state, particularly French heads of state, that were trying probably to integrate Russia. We did not think that this was the proper orientation that we should take, because we had this experience of the history. Let's not forget that Poland was 50 years a Russian satellite. We as country, we were colonized. There's absolutely in Poland and in the Baltic States is that we belong to the Western Europe. We were never pro-Moscow. We all the political parties, whatever their political, they do not want to fall back into that Russian period, and you can see this in the support for Ukraine. Whether it's now slowly, but slightly the right wing, but the conservative right, if you vote left or right, you're almost very pro-Ukrainian and very anti-Russian. So yes, indeed, the fear of Russia is here, and I think you can see the most tangible result is the military expenditures. They have exploded since the beginning of the war. In 2022, Poland was spending 2.4% of their GDP for defense. In 2025, it's 4.7%, a record among the NATO countries. And we're talking about 187 million zlotys, so 143 million euros in military investments, in modernization of the army, and a huge project of citizens' mobilization. Today we have about 200,000 soldiers in Poland. That is the biggest army in Europe, next to France and Italy and Spain. But there will probably about 300,000 in 2035. So Poland will be the first army in terms of volume in army and also in terms of modernity in Europe. And that comes from this direct threat. Let's not forget that this threat is not just imaginary. There's Russian rockets that fall onto the Polish territory. There's Polish people who died from Russian. What would happen if in Paris, if suddenly a rocket coming from Belgium, there would be a generalized panic. So, or drones that are fly over, or cruise missiles that regionally breach our airspace. Yes, we should talk about this. What does this mean, feeling this fear of war on your daily lives, and understand what the war in Ukraine has changed in the daily lives of each Polish people? Maybe the number of Ukrainian refugees living in Poland. If you go in Virginia, I've seen a couple of months ago, is that the Ukrainian population is extremely important. This is entire families that came to settle in Poland. What has really changed in this Polish society for the past 2.5 years? Yes, there's a strong number of Ukrainians. There was already more than 1 million of economical migrants in Poland from Ukraine because we managed to understand our languages are the culture is close, the language is close. So, of course, naturally for them, Poland is a logical destination when you were looking for war, and then when you had to. So we have about 2 or 3 million Ukrainians. They're very well integrated in society. I think that's hardly any issues on that in Poland. Yes, indeed. Since the beginning of the war, there's been some changes in attitude regarding the Ukrainians. People are more talking about for the need for a diplomatic solution. But I think this consensus, you see it everywhere, considering that militarily the situation is not moving on the ground. So and then you have the refugees, and then you have a huge economical impact, particularly like in France. The inflation in France was about 20%, like in Poland, because of the cost of energy. We also benefited from the cheap European Russian gas. Lots of tensions in the agricultural sector. It seems that they've calmed down because of the funds from the EU that have been able to safeguard the Polish agriculture. But don't forget that Poland, together with Romania, are on the first line regarding imports from Ukrainian wheat. That really was, and Poland was completely inundated with Ukrainian wheat, and that has completely destroyed Polish agriculture. These are really tangible results. Mihaela, we're going to speak about your country, Romania. Like Poland has welcomed thousands of refugees. Would you say that the Romanians cannot live without this possibility, this perspective of war? I wanted to ask you what are the big discussions of the week while all the leaders who were in New York for the General Assembly of the United Nations. What do the Romanians think of the possibility to allow Vladimir Zelensky to use long-range cruise missiles to hit Russian bases deep inside the Russian territory? And did Zelensky has a time of negotiation has come, which seems to when he imagines a second summit for peace that could probably happen in Switzerland in November. How does the Romanian society react to these big debates of the moment? First of all, I wanted to say that Romania has borders with Ukraine, with Moldavia, and with the Black Sea. Right next to us, we have a border with the Black Sea. And Romania has often said, a couple of years ago, just like my Polish colleague has said, that we warned that there's a danger coming from Russia and that we need to reinforce the security on our eastern flank of the NATO, of Europe. And this was there was only declarations and diplomatic efforts, but nothing much happened. Then February 2022, and we discovered that this was the war at the doorsteps of Europe, and we had the biggest refugee crisis after World War II. And the borders of Romania are immediately opened for millions of Ukrainians, and the solidarity that we've displayed with the refugees really went through Europe and the entire planet. We welcomed millions of Ukrainians who really crossed the border on foot in order to come to the north of Romania and the east of Romania, and then the rest of Romania in order to find a refuge. And the solidarity of the Romanian citizens has impressed many people. And of course, after that, then the European institutions have took over, immediately did the approaches in order to organize these refugee flows, and Romania was part of that. But what we have shown, what we have demonstrated, a capacity to react very quickly, an empathetic way, lots of human warmth and lots of hospitality. It's true that many refugees did not stay in Romania. They continued on. They either went on to other countries like Poland. And last year, we counted about 83,000 refugees from Ukraine, mainly women and children, small children and elderly people. And this year, in March, April, we counted about 77,000 refugees. For these refugees, the Romanian state pays subsidies. There's free school, free housing, and there's subsidies. But the integration is not easy for them because Ukrainians speak a Slavic language while the Romanians speak a Latin language. The alphabet is completely different. It's not an alphabet that we use in Romania. And I don't know if you know that Romania, it's a francophone country. We are part of the great family of Latin countries like France, like Italy, like Spain, and we are. Allow me to say, and we are very proud of this, and this is the reality. Romania is the only francophone country of Eastern Europe because we are very close to the Francophone Summit that is going to happen next week. If we look at the army side and the military side and the Romanian citizens, how we live with the war at their doorstep, first of all, you can say that we're used to having war at the borders of Romania. The second time, we can say that we've reinforced the possibilities of defense. As you know, Romania is part of NATO since 2024, so 20 years ago, and part of the EU since 2007. So we have been Europeans, 100% Europeans, and we have the same equal rights among the other NATO countries. And France has now about 1,000 French soldiers stationed in Romania. France is the main country that defending the eastern flank of the NATO, and next year we're going to have 3,000 more soldiers to reinforce this this part of the eastern defense of the NATO. We made some efforts. We've donated a Patriot system to Ukraine from the beginning. Since today, we are close to the solidarity is 100% in our country, and our support is really important. And everyone appreciates the efforts that Romania does.
And at the same time, you told me when you were preparing this meeting that people are getting a bit tired of this war in Ukraine. Can you say a few words about this? What does it mean? And can you answer this question? Do you think the Romanians consider, as Anna said for the Poles, that now is the time to negotiate? And what can we negotiate with Russia and Vladimir Putin? At the beginning, we said that we couldn't negotiate and discuss with a dictator because Vladimir Putin is a dictator. That were the very first phases of the war. Afterwards, we thought we need to find a solution because it can no longer do this because everyone's tired, because we no longer have soldiers on the front line, because there's no military means to oppose this war. And so we don't have any highly specialized units. We have pilots, we have drones, we have planes, extra, but all of a sudden we have this energy crisis triggered because of war. The inflation, the agricultural crisis, the crisis of a transportation crisis, and it started in Romania and it spread to all the countries like a heat wave. And in Poland, Belgium, Luxembourg, Poland, and also France. And people are tired, and we started to say that people are exhausted because of war. And we see that in Romania, Poland, France, etc., because we need to find a solution. And what is the solution? The solution is peace. But how can we have peace if we cannot have negotiations? And this is what we realized in the United States during the General Assembly of the UN. The leaders of today want to get an answer. How can we achieve peace? How can we start the negotiations? Okay, since we're talking about negotiations, and we seem like you kind of agree around this table that populations in Romania and Poland should think they should start negotiations. It's a good thing that we have an ambassador sitting with us at this table, and we'll talk about the official position of Lithuania. But we see that there may be a diplomatic way to start the negotiations. But this being said, when we get into more details, we realize that the Russian diplomacy starts with recognizing the right of Russia to have these territories, these occupied territories, and sometimes since 2014, the southeast of Ukraine and Crimea, when President Volodymyr Zelensky said he wanted to get back to the previous borders as acknowledged, as recognized by the international community. So let's go back to the borders before 2014 and remember that Crimea was given by Khrushchev to Ukraine. How can we agree in spite of these two positions? Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you today during this very interesting forum. And it's quite successful, to be honest. So it's a very interesting question. It's true that we are all in favor of peace. It's not even a question. The EU was created for peace. The main funders like Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman, they created the EU in order to achieve peace on the continent. And we should never forget that Europeans want peace, but not at any cost. And as you said, in order to negotiate with dictators, which doesn't seem to have the will to have a sustainable peace, it's almost nearly impossible. As the expression says, it takes two to tango, and we need a partner to dance tango, but unfortunately we don't have a partner. We don't have any partner in Russia. We cannot reach a compromise on these occupied territories of Ukraine, because if we start compromising on this, it would be a terrible mistake, a historic mistake of major proportion for all the democracies and all the sovereign states. How can we justify that a country which is a permanent member of the Security Council to act so randomly in another country? So it is maybe the reason why Poland, Romania, the Baltic States, Lithuania, we supported hard Ukraine, but we also wanted to preserve our integrity as a Western country, and wanted to avoid the temptation of making a serious mistake. And we often say about the Baltic States, and more specifically about Lithuania, that you were like a whistleblowing countries, and most notably my colleague Sylvie Kaufmann wrote a book to talk about the colleagues in the West, and people considering that it was absolutely possible to discuss with Vladimir Putin and to make some compromises. But the Baltic States, as soon as the crisis exploded in Georgia and the Russian army occupied Abkhazia and South Ossetia, they realized that it was just the beginning with Vladimir Putin. And you were right, because in 2014, the annexion of Crimea, do you get the feeling that in the past few years you were screaming and no one could hear you blowing the whistle without no one paying attention? Do you think there was some kind of gap between the west of Europe and the east of Europe? Kind of, yes, it's true. In the European Parliament, I was the assistant of two presidents, Martin Schulz and Jerzy Buzek, who is also Polish. And I had to be extremely patient, because you cannot trust Vladimir Putin. You can never trust him, because, as you mentioned, the invasion of Georgia, Moldova, all these conflicts linked to Russia one way or another. And we have many historic examples, so to prove that we cannot trust that man. And that's what we said we've been saying for months and months and years since we became a member of the EU. But in the last 3 years, people started to say that you were perfectly right. And this historic speech by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, that's what she said in her speech. It was a historic moment for us too, because we realized that 20 years after becoming a member of the EU, we see a challenge inside the EU too. Let's bring some elements of complexity in our discussion, because I would not say to the people who are not familiar with this conflict that everyone agrees with that. I wouldn't say that everyone agreed that Vladimir Putin is a threat, but it's true that we have what we call the Orban model, who chose a complete different approach. Like Viktor Orban is pretty much one to still be in touch with Vladimir Putin in the past few months, for example. And do you think that this alternative model in Eastern Europe has an influence on the Polish society? Do you mean the Orban model and Russia? Yeah, I mean by that the way to see differently, to have a different point of view when it comes to Vladimir Putin. So you have the Western model with the Western values. I think we probably already mentioned now Poland has always been quite distant, at a distance from Russia. We always had some fear when it comes to Russia. Even when the far right was in power, it didn't change for different reasons, and mostly because we spent decades under communism. It costed a lot of money, a lot of freedoms were confiscated, and it's still something strong in Poland, including for far-right movements. Let's not forget that the EU in 2015 saw Poland becoming what we call illiberal democracy, and now we have once again a liberal democracy, and it changed our attitude towards Europe. And it's very difficult to understand because Poles are very pro-European. If you look at the surveys in Poles, the support given by Poles to EU, we reach 90%, the highest score in the EU, because I think the average is 54%. But at one point, until recently, we had a party which may decide to agree on some values and disagree on other values. You mean that the PIS party decided that it may actually disagree on the law, on the independence of media, about abortion, but at the same time not completely disagreeing completely with the EU and not completely disagreeing with Russia. Is that right? Yes, it is. And I think it was more kind of some sort of nationalism, because we wanted to show that Poland is very strong and independent, and there's no way we allow the EU to do what they want to do with Poland. And the PIS lost the elections in 2023, and now we have a new democratic and progressive country elected in December 2023. We have a lot of pro-European reforms coming up, and I think it's a good thing that the government managed to recreate this trust with the EU. For example, being able to give 137 million euros to Poland. These funds previously frozen because of the disagreements with the PIS. It's called the cohesion plan. So thanks to the diplomatic work done by the new government, we managed to get this money. So a strong European identity in Romania and Poland and in the Baltic States. But when you focus a bit more, and when you talk about defense, do you think the Romanians, now we know that they're afraid of war, do you think they have more trust in NATO in the EU, and I'm sure you probably say yes for NATO, but do you think there are some kind of worries while everyone's waiting to see the results of the presidential elections in the US? Or do you get the feeling that without NATO, without this membership to Europe, to NATO, because you're all members of NATO, you wanted to become members of NATO. Why? Because you were afraid of war? Does it mean that without NATO you would feel too vulnerable? As I always said, Romania is the member of NATO, and we joined in 2004. It was a long way to go to become a member of NATO. Why? Because we know that we have a security umbrella, as we call it, and we also have a warranty of peace, and that and a defense provided by NATO. What do we see now? Well, we have a military base in Romania. This French military base right in the center of Romania in the Carpathes region. If you know the city of Chingu. So the Romanians and the French are training together and they get ready. But frankly speaking, the upcoming elections at the end of November and beginning of December will not change anything to our situation, our security, our economy, our politics, because we are sure of Europe and we sure of NATO. After 50 years of communism and 30 years of democracy, more than 30 years of democracy, we have a brand new democracy in Romania. And we will not go back. We will not experience fear again and insecurity. And I'm sure that people will tell you that nothing is not going to change in November or December. Mr. Ambassador, we wanted to understand, how do we live in peace while war is at your door? How do you live in a complete peaceful way when Ukraine and Lithuania is threatened by Russia? Once again, this week, Putin threatened to use the nuclear weapons, and you suffered some cyber attacks, most notably in 2008, which completely blocked the whole country of Latvia. And you know that you welcome many dissidents, including journalists and relatives of Alexei Navalny. One of them was attacked, and it's obvious that when we track the origin of this attack, we have to go back to Kremlin. So how do you live with these everyday threats? I think one way to live under the menace is to be strong and to trust in you. If we look at the three Baltic states, 20 years ago, we were the most vulnerable countries from the energy point of view. 100% depending on Russian energy, and now we are the first ones since April 2022 without gas, oil, nothing at all. So we are completely independent. But we spent 10 to 15 years on voting reforms, and as you said, we are extremely vulnerable to cyber attacks. And now the three Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, are potentially the most resilient countries in Europe, and we share our experience with countries in Eastern Europe, like Poland, like Georgia, but also the Balkanic states. And you also have other influences. And same for the narrative. So it's necessary to feel this trust. And we need to think ourselves about our defense, because we almost have 3% of the GDP for defense, and we're counting on the help of our supporters. As someone said, if you want peace, you need to be ready for war. So you're preparing for war in order to achieve peace, but you don't want to go to war. And indeed, yes, in our situation, we have a border with Belarus and the dictator Lukashenko, and the borders with Kaliningrad. And Lukashenko organized these movements of migrants at our borders and the borders with Poland. We have to be strong. We have to show that there's a possibility to defend ourselves. So if you want peace, you need to prepare war. That's the quote that you use in your countries. And I'll give the floor to the audience, but I'm sure you have many questions. Talking about resilience and vitality in your country and how energetic your countries are. Anna, it's true that Poles usually don't say often that they will become the first army of Europe, but they're very proud of highlighting the economic success, the economic growth, and Poland is pretty much always above the European average. And you see that this political renewal with these new elections last year, and it's true, when you go to Poland you get this feeling of modernity. And when you come back to Paris, we get the feeling that you come back to a second-rate city, to be honest. Tell us more about Poland. Yeah, we often say that in English that old habits die hard, and we always get the feeling that in France that we consider that Poland just woke up after 50 years of communism, but we've been working for 20 years, and we are now we've been members of the EU for 20 years, and I keep on always have the customs officer in France keep on asking me my passport. We have 38 million inhabitants with the sixth economy in Europe, and if we continue with the same growth, probably in the next 5 years, the Poles will be much richer than the Britons and the Italians. So this map, you showed at the beginning of the presentation, is that we become a major player in the EU. We knew we would be able to do this. And obviously, we got the feeling in Europe, in Poland, that this old Europe is tired, rich, but predictable. And it's get the feeling that we have these new ambitions, this kind of creativity, and something innovative. And I think you probably tell us the same thing, Miela, when you talk about the Romanian society in 2024. While we were preparing this meeting, you told us that Romania no longer wants to be presented as the poorest country in Europe. And we need to remind everyone that, moving on to the strategic, the political weight of Romania, we now have two vice presidents from Romania in this brand new European Commission. You have costs. You had costs on the Black Sea, and we have a lot of students, and many French students are going to Romania to study. Not only medicine students, but how do you explain this dynamism? And it's quite the opposite to the German society, and the French society was kind of lost their enthusiasm. And we have a lot of prejudices regarding Romania. People, they go to Romania and then they come back to France afterwards. And I was completely surprised because you speak French, you speak English, you are highly developed in Romania. I used to think differently, but I've discovered a country that's truly European, a modern country, and really educated people, and safety is guaranteed in the streets. And we really get the feeling that the middle class is well represented. we also have lights in all the streets of Romania. So before that, they used to turn the street lights off at night, but now it's no longer the case. It's true, yes. In 2007, we had like some kind of fireworks. We were able to travel with just the ID card. And now we're part of the Schengen area, and we expect, at least for the maritime borders and probably for rail and for the roads, we expect in the next years to receive visas for the United States. It will be a great victory for Romania. And forget everything you thought you knew about Romania and think about the present of Romania. We are very well represented because we're doing a great job. We are highly educated and we adapt very quickly. And we also have a diaspora in pretty much all the countries in the EU. Anyone say that we need to forget what we thought? We thought about, and we need to consider Romanians as equal to the other citizens of other countries. Same for you, Mr. Ambassador. You can talk about the resilience of Lithuania and the Baltic States in general. Let me remind everyone that you are well represented because now we have the cultural season of Lithuania, sorry, until the 12th of December. We have a Lithuanian creativeness, movies and artists. And we shouldn't avoid this topic of war. So I have many questions I wanted to ask you. And one question is, how do you live with this nuclear threat used by Vladimir Putin? Do you really think that negotiations will start soon, or do you get the feeling that it's just like an expression, a meaningless suggestion? Do you think we should support Vladimir Zelensky so to continue with the war? Because do you think the United States and the Western allies should allow Ukraine to hit the Russian territory with long-range missiles? Yes, well, in favor of this. You're not afraid of an escalation and the direct consequences for Lithuania? Well, we think that in the Western countries we're way too obsessed by the potential escalation and too worried about what Putin thinks. It's not our job of thinking about what's in the head of Vladimir Putin. Our job is to help Ukraine to win this war. And we have a lot of red lines to kind of prevented the division of potential solutions. And now we're having this discussion about how we can allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles to hit the Russian territory. We've been talking for many months. We wanted to take this decision, and Mr. Zelensky really needs that to destroy all the ammunitions in Russia currently threatening the Ukrainian citizens and the energy grid of many countries in Ukraine. So every day we keep discussing this point. Well, we allow Russia to keep on bombing cities and targets in Ukraine. And I hope that we'll have great news. I know that Volodymyr Zelensky is presenting his plan to the President Joe Biden. We had very important discussions at the United Nations. And President Zelensky is clear, is much clearer than me. It says what he thinks is necessary for Ukraine. obviously, ammunitions. We need to have the authorization to use long-range missiles. And the membership of to NATO, and we'll have to talk about this. And for the other countries, even to he had some nuances, because if he said that if membership of NATO is not possible, then we will have the necessary defense conditions similar to Article 5. Yes, the guarantees granted by Article number 5 is pretty much the only way for Ukraine to guarantee its sovereignty and to preserve its territory. And it's extremely important, and we need to remember this is pretty much the only way to stop Putin. And we shouldn't think about constantly about escalation, because we saw that it never happened. Putin several times threatened to use nuclear weapons, that to bring sanctions to Lithuania, but nothing happened afterwards. Ukraine also invaded the Kursk region, and nothing happened afterwards. And we have many examples where Putin threatened to use nuclear weapon. It was only used to deter us and to prevent us from helping Ukraine.
Is it also like this that Romanian society looks at the news, Mihaela? You spoke about war fatigue earlier on. Is this war fatigue not prevents Romanians to be in the same position as Lithuania? Is there a certain category of the Romanian population saying we're not going to go further, we're not going to let Zelensky hit Russia with long-range missiles because we're afraid of domino effects, or we're afraid for the Romanian borders or for Moldavian cousin with Transnistria, which is territory where there's already Russian soldiers in there. What is the approach in Romania? We remember very well February this year when the President Emmanuel Macron welcomed at the French presidential palace the leaders of the world to see what can we do on more for Ukraine. And the debate that was at the end, should we send soldiers to Ukraine, European soldiers to Ukraine or not? You need to be very honest. This was a very divisive topic regarding the response to that question. And the president of Romania said very clearly that Romania is not going to send soldiers on the Ukrainian front. But back then, we were in the situation of where can we say yes or no to send these missiles, to long-range missiles to shoot these missiles on the Russian territory, or another phase of the war. And I was looking, just like a journalist, since I'm a journalist, I was looking at the declarations from Joe Biden and Volodymyr Zelensky and Emmanuel Macron at the National Assembly, at the General Assembly of the UN, and I counted many times the word peace. I noted many times the word negotiation. And I haven't heard the word since February 2022. These words repeated so often and so strongly by the most strongest leaders of the Western world. So I think it is the moment to say, what can we do for peace? How can we negotiate? Because winter is coming, and all the infrastructures, Ukraine, the energy infrastructure in Ukraine, 80% is destroyed, the energy infrastructure. And Romania has provided lots of electricity to Ukraine, who's really in a very difficult situation. And we know at the same time that the winter in Ukraine, in Russia, it is a difficult time. Each day that goes by without achieving peace costs millions of life of Ukrainians, lives of Russians who fight in conditions of World War I in trenches, and that is really, really, really very difficult, because there are young people here who are looking. When we're saying it's Game of Thrones, winter is coming. Yes, winter is coming, and it's going to cause lots and lots of problems on the front. Thank you to remind also what's the reality of this war, with winter coming in a country of which 80% of the energy infrastructures have been destroyed by the bombings. Thank you very much to all three of you. I'm being signaled that we should leave times for questions, for There are there are microphones coming. And a first question. I think it's always very difficult to answer first question, but thank you for that question.
Alors.
Microphone seems to not be working.
Ah.
Does it work?
Bonjour.
Hello. Please get up. I wanted to ask, do you think that the fact that Donald Trump could be re-elected, would that change anything to the support of the US in this war? Excellent question.
C'est évidemment une crainte des
That is, of course, a fear of the Polish people that have counted a lot on the US protection. Is that also something that you have in the debate or the problem? Yes, absolutely. I don't know if you remember this famous sentence that Donald Trump said at one moment. He said he will not be protecting any countries if they do not spend 2% of their GDP in trade. This does not concern Poland, but if we hear from the potential US president that he will not be protecting NATO countries, that of course is very worrying and scary. We're very concerned by this. It's also the reason why Poland has pushed these past years at the European level for European military aid, a stronger military aid for Ukraine, because we thought that we have our own European protection for Ukraine and for other countries. If the United States withdraw, which is the case. Actually, at the moment, Europe helps more Ukraine than the US, but there's also huge nuclear questions in Poland. We speak a lot about should there be a nuclear war, we just spoke about. We don't think it's going to happen, but what Vladimir Putin followed closely, the United States are the only ones that can protect us. And we've been fighting for a long time that France, and if you have the means to participate, that France uses his nuclear weaponry, the defense for Europe, the Baltic countries, the 5 major nuclear powers, official nuclear powers, are the 5 members of the UN Security Council, which replaces the other countries in a situation of vulnerability. Your Excellency, you wanted to answer. It's a very good question. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock, in 40 minutes, Professor Zelensky is going to meet Donald Trump in the Trump Tower. We might find out more about this issue. What is the position of the President Zelensky wanted to meet absolutely Donald Trump in New York, and that is very important because that Mr. Zelensky meets with both, because you need to be prepared for all the cases, all the possible results of the election, of this crucial election, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire world. And I think in 2016, when Donald Trump was elected for the first time, we were all flabbergasted. Nobody was prepared for that, especially in Europe. Nobody thought that would happen. And we discovered how difficult it would be to work with the Trump administration. And I hope that today it's going to be different, because lots of people are preparing. They're working with both sides, with the Democrats and with Kamala Harris, and also with Donald Trump, in order to be less surprised, less taken short in January when things happen. My hope is that anyone who would be the president of the United States will remain the strongest ally of Ukraine and also the strongest ally of the European Union. The necessity for these countries in East Europe to continue to believe into the possible US umbrella that seems to be more reassuring than in the very beginning European defense. No, we have someone in the back. No.
Bonjour.
Hello. You spoke about numerous things for the continuation of the war. You spoke attacks with long-range missiles and negotiations for peace. I wanted to know, would it be more a choice that we have to do between attacking with missiles or negotiation, or are these solutions that are running in parallel? I'm going to let the ambassador answer on this question. Maybe just through my work as a journalist, remind the fact in the peace plan that Vladimir Zelensky has presented to Joe Biden, there's already been some leakages into it. He wants to ask within the peace plan, so it's not contradictory. He via the possible recourse to long-range missiles. It wants to have guarantees, maybe not join the NATO and with security guarantees. And the second round of negotiation that could happen in November in Switzerland. But that's the dream of Zelensky, but he's kind of alone to believe in that. Well, he's not alone. There's many other member states that support him in that strategy, and we've seen in this summit for peace that President has organized already with the participation of about 100 countries concerned. Yes, it's difficult to convince, particularly the Global South. And during the plenary session of the UN, we have discussed this with the speaker. Yeah, it's hard to get the countries of the Global South. That's always the discussions that we need to carry, the Europeans and the United States, with our partners in Africa and Latin America and Asia, to better explain what is going on, to better explain the true reasons for Vladimir Putin and Russia and the history, and to have a much wider alliance to support the peace project of President Zelensky. Yes, there will be negotiations. Of course, in each war at the end, there are negotiations, or for a peace agreement, that is certain. But under what conditions, on what basis, and on what principles? The principles of President Zelensky are very strong and very important for him, but also for the Ukrainian people, and I think also for us as Europeans. And let's remember, there's been no meetings between the Ukrainian diplomats and the Russian diplomats. The Russians refused the principle of an encounter. For the moment, the Russian diplomats refused to participate in this summit for peace that Zelensky has proposed for November. Another question. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this very interesting debate. My name is Rost. I'm an artist, and I'm also a chronicist on different webcasts. We're working on international topics. And I have a question. We have just seen what's going on in the Middle East with the opening of a new front in Lebanon after Gaza. And so we know that this conflict has kind of pushed aside the Ukrainian issue in many countries. Now people are more worried about Israel-Palestine. Israel has just received 8.7 billion to continue the war, while the international community has said that this needs to stop. Wouldn't this money be more useful to defend Ukraine rather than continue a war, what is going on in the Middle East? What is the position of Ukraine based on this? Aren't you afraid that this conflict basically takes away the possibility of continuing the war in best conditions? I'm going to let my yes to answer. I have here a colleague, journalist, who interviewed Vladimir Zelensky after the massacre of Hamas in Israel, and who told us that how she saw the absolute horror in the face of Zelensky, because he knew that there would be a very brutal answer from Israel in a new war, and he knew that this war would push away from the spotlight his own war. But his ambassador, this raises a fundamental question: should we oppose the two conflicts among others? Is there a competition between the conflicts, or should we refuse that competition and fund both wars and take the conflicts one after the other and not oppose them? I think that in our world, everything is linked. It's not possible to separate one issue from the other, one conflict from the other, and the attention. We have limited time, attention spans of the United States, of the European countries. So when the conflict in the Middle East flared up, then we were very worried in Lithuania that this would kind of push out of the spotlight the attention for Ukraine. And also give more arguments to the countries that are not convinced in their support for Ukraine and the West in this battle. So because the conflict in the Middle East, we know, is extremely volatile. It's an old conflict with many divisions, internal divisions in the regions, very dangerous conflict and very hard to resolve. So, of course, sadly, what happened in Israel in October and then in Gaza, this was a gift for Vladimir Putin because many interventions where the attention was focused on that Sunday, but it's two different conflicts and they need to be addressed differently. Even though we can find systems of alliances that are interesting to underline. I mean, the strategic proximity between Iran and Russia of Vladimir Putin in terms of military alliance, because we know that Iran delivers a certain number of weapons to the Russia of Vladimir Putin to fight in Ukraine. I think that we've seen far clearer things, the role of Iran as the sponsor of, as you said, of the war in Ukraine with the support of Russia. Same with North Korea. Sadly, also a major help by China for Russia, but also that was also very revealing for the leaders of Israel who who did not support Ukraine strongly before and had very strong ties close ties with President Putin. But I think this conflict has shown them that Russia, Ukrainians were very angry against Medvedev that he was not concerned about the first period of the conflict. Yes, another question maybe. There's some frustrations in the first line, because only questions in the back. So now someone from the front, please.
Oui.
Yes. Can I go? Yes. Hello. Do you think that in case of Russian victory, the influence of the West would wane on the world? And could then Asia take control of the leadership? And what would it change in our lives? Excellent question.
Je ne sais pas qui veut répondre.
I don't know who wants to answer. Sadly, again, this is a question for you, Mr. Ambassador. Can you project yourself in the scenario a defeat of Ukraine, a victory of Russia, of Vladimir Putin, and then the victory, since we're talking about alliances, of an axis that already exists between Moscow and Beijing? Even though if China would like to constantly remind of the world that it's neutral, it's a world of peace, which of course is very controversial, but could you project yourself in this scenario and maybe imagine the consequences for the great lines of influence in our world? Well, first of all, I think that all the dictators in the world are looking at what's going on and how this war is going to end, Russia against Ukraine, because it's really the test for everyone. Can we compromise the international law or the system on which it's built of the institutions, international institutions, including the United Nations, and have no consequences on that? So yes, absolutely, if Ukraine loses this war, then for the Western world and for its role in the world, it would be a very hard blow, and of course the opportunity for China, particularly for China, to have them play a far more important role in the power play at the international level. It was interesting the way you formulated your question. It would be a loss of influence for the Western world. I'm turning to my. Would that say that democracy and international law, it's part of the Western world, but that Eastern Europe, Poland, particularly reminds us that that the old democracies do not have the monopoly of being democratic countries in Poland, in Taiwan. So this is not the Western world, it's Asia. Also countries like the Philippines, countries like South Korea. So this love for democracy and this respect for international law is not just a Western thing. The movie we saw at the beginning shows us that we should maybe redefine what the Western world means today. Democracy works as well in Poland as in France, probably even better than in France. But this question, I think there's a more tangible reason, which we fear in Poland. If Vladimir Putin should win this war in Ukraine, we are convinced that it will not stop there. It's going to attack other countries. It's going to go beyond and to carry the war into Europe far much further. I think His Excellency the Ambassador shares. If Putin wins in Ukraine, that's why we are also consisting on military aid in Ukraine. Then he's going to attack the Baltic States or Poland. That means this would be war for everyone here in the NATO countries. This is going to be concerning for everyone here. So this is a scenario which we do not want to see. It's not just a Russian-Ukrainian. This is just a dike that if it break, it would influence the entire Europe. Hello. Yes, hello. Thank you for this very interesting debate. Ms. Aubry, you mentioned earlier Moldavia. Yes, indeed, I would like to know the position of Moldavia in this conflict, because they're really at the doorstep of war. You can't be any closer, particularly with Transnistria, which you mentioned. What's your opinion on that? And how this is perceived in Romania? Thank you. And I'm going to ask my neighbor to answer that. Maybe a quick recall. Moldavia, which does not have the security that you have in Romania, not member of the EU, not member of the NATO, with this existence of this breakaway region, independent, that has declared its own independence and not recognized by international system, and Transnistria. For those who can know, who've been able to visit it, this is really in the former Soviet Union. It reminds you of a Soviet country. There's a complete proximity with the Putin system and with Russian troops that are stationed.
Quel impact?
What is the impact on the threat? The threat you were mentioning in Moldavia, it's already tenfold. This proximity between Moldavia and Romania. Yes, we have a common border with the Republic of Moldavia, and in theory and in practice, it's very complicated. The president of the Republic of Moldavia, Ms. Maia Sandu, who is a very brave president, who wants to, for her country, she wants a European future for her country. She's visited not just in France and Romania to discuss with Emmanuel Macron and with our President Klaus Johannes how can we ensure that Moldavia could be even more European than before, and how we can become member of the European Union. And as you know, on October 20th, there's a presidential election in Republic of Moldavia at the same time with a referendum. And the people of Moldavia are asked during this referendum if they agree or not to become members of the EU, and if they want to become European in full right. And because it's true that the EU has has started the process of joining to the European Union for Ukraine and for Republic of Moldavia. They work at these two processes are in parallel, but I just want to remind you that Romania had to wait for a long, long time before becoming member of. We had to correct many things. We had to fulfill many conditions, and there were conditions that were asked by the European Union, legal, political, economical. And for Republic of Moldavia, it's really the fast track. It's really hard. The security in this entire region is being questioned. And why? Because it's hard to have a free country at the border, even if now we're saying that in a certain manner the Moldavian Republic is protected and so de jure, but the president of Moldavia, Ms. Maya Sandu, is running for this election. All the surveys said that she has, all the polls said that she will still be the president of the Republic for the next mandate. So that would mean that the question of joining the EU would not even be an issue. As far as Transnistria is concerned, it's really a very difficult situation for us to understand and to explain, because everything is complicated in Transnistria. And Vladimir Putin and Russia, they both say that Transnistria is just like a bomb placed in that could blow up at any moment. And the impact would be very difficult to envision should there be. But what happened in the last years with the Republic of Moldavia, it's very interesting because it shows us, gives us hope for the small country, very, very brave country, very combative country. This is really the pathway that this country has chosen, the European Union and not Russia, leaning towards EU and not towards Russia. Thank you very much. We have a microphone problem, apparently. Is there a second microphone?
Sinon, si vous...
Else, if you shout very loudly, we should hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am today participated in the very interesting topics. I am Vladimir Rahmani. Basically, I am from Afghanistan, and now I am living as a refugee in Paris. I am very glad to be here, a part of these debates, and I have heard a lot of important things which you have shared with different delegates. I would like to ask a question from Mr. Ambassador. Since you have talked about the war and peace in the world, when the USA and NATO has come with different countries in Afghanistan and the fight against of terrorism in Afghanistan, and spend a lot of budgets for the people of Afghanistan to have a stable country and a stable democracy and human rights over there. But unfortunately, on 2021, the USA has left Afghanistan without preparation and prediction, and left Afghanistan peoples alone, and also the women of Afghanistan and the darkness and the situation without having education. How much do you think the same situation will not be able to come over there and Ukraine when the USA is talking about negotiation? How much we believe for the negotiation of peace, which is going to be supported by the USA now?
Merci. Thank you very much for your question. Thank you. Voilà, ce monsieur qui est...
Yes, this gentleman who was Afghan refugee was wondering if it's envisionable that one day the United States would not be the bulwark, just like for Ukraine, just like if they've abandoned Afghanistan and opened the door to Taliban and plunging the country in a very dramatic situation for women. Let's just remind that women in Afghanistan, they are not allowed to leave their homes, and even their voices should not be heard in public anymore. There's a Hollywoodian actress, Meryl Streep, that reminded that today in Afghanistan, a bird has more rights than a woman. Yes, the speech by Meryl Streep was very intense. Yes, I heard it. Yes, I think we were all surprised by the decision, by the running away from the United States so quickly. I was vice minister, and we were also evacuating our own citizens from Afghanistan, but also refugees, Afghan families, Afghan friends who had been working for us in Afghanistan. So yes, I was in charge of the evacuation of 200 interpreters, Afghan interpreters from Kabul to Vilnius and towards Warsaw. And it was extremely hard for us to do it best, even to the last minute. And our last plane took off from the tarmac of Kabul an hour or 2 hours before the Taliban took the airport, before the Americans took off. So I think it is a tragic story for us, a tragic memory for us, and that is a lesson we may have learned. On one hand, that of our responsibility of the Western world to build a true democracy, and how important it is to have a peace and sustainable peace. When you said we imposed peace, that is what we want to avoid with Ukraine. Nobody wants to push peace down the throat of the Ukrainian people. It needs to be their choice. They need to decide how they want to have peace, and in order to have a just and sustainable peace with and a lasting peace, you need to build that peace on much stronger foundations than what we did, sadly, in Afghanistan.
C'est la conclusion.
Thank you very much. This is the conclusion of our debate.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Armidas Frankevicius. Thank you, Mihaela Antosh, for being with us today. And Anna Kowalska, brilliant Anna Kowalska.
De la télévision publique polonaise.
From the public Polish TV. Thank you very much. Final word for someone. I think she's with us. And I was really moved by her word. Her name is Diana. She's a young Ukrainian girl, and she had to leave Kharkiv, where her family is stayed, and she's now being hosted by a French family in Le Havre. She's bright, she's courageous, and I hope she comes to talk to us. And thank you.
Voilà Diana. On peut l'applaudir.
Here is Diana. You can give her a round of applause.